We're going to shift gears now away from why climate change is happening and instead take a look at what we can do about it. Take a moment to read this slide. There are several important takeaways. First is the idea that no one party is responsible for tackling this problem or is capable of tackling this problem. We're all responsible for the mess we are in, and we need to all be responsible for finding some solutions. It's up to government, business, and consumers to make this happen. The other important point on this slide is that the forces of government, especially international law, are too weak to solve the problem. We talked about this quite a bit when we were talking about global governance, and these issues of global governance are particularly acute when it comes to talking about climate change. It's up to consumers, governments, and businesses to work together to solve this problem. We're going to look at each of these groups and consider some solutions. Briefly, as consumers, we can make smart choices about our lifestyles and consumption. As businesses, we can look at alternative business models and corporate social responsibility. And as governments, we can take this seriously and act collectively to create positive change. The government can have enormous impact both locally and globally, for better or for worse, on climate change. One thing the government can do is to fund basic research to drive clean energy technology forward. That basic research can then be commercialized through technology transfer. Programs like the STAR program can help businesses reduce emissions. Other options would be fuel efficiency standards that the government can set for cars and trucks. A good example of this in the news at the moment is the fuel efficiency fight between the federal government and some states like California. California has higher fuel efficiency standards, while the federal government wants to lower fuel efficiency standards. Other options are market-based programs like cap and trade that can be sponsored by the government. In a cap and trade program, each company is given an emissions cap or limit. If at the end of the year they produced less emissions than their limit, they can trade that difference to a company who might exceed their limit. This incents companies to come in below their cap so that they can then earn money by trading the difference. And then rich companies who exceeded their cap are at least forced to pay for their sins. Governments can also give tax incentives to stimulate the behavior they want. Many governments subsidize the purchase of an electric vehicle, for example. On a personal note, when I remodeled my farmhouse in Kentucky, we put geothermal in it for our heating and air conditioning system instead of standard electricity or natural gas. We got a tax break to help offset the cost of putting in geothermal. But there's always a trade-off. In an effort to stimulate the economy, the Trump administration has reversed many of the climate-friendly initiatives of the Obama administration, and that statement was true long before the coronavirus outbreak. Globally, the government can participate in global governance through a variety of treaties and organizations that we'll cover. They're listed here on your slide. The IPCC is a panel that was set up by the United Nations in 1998 to be the definitive word on climate change. This panel is made up of top scientists, and they were tasked with providing objective scientific data on climate change. At the time, and still today, there are climate deniers. The IPCC set out to provide good factual evidence and data to the extent that it is available about climate change. The IPCC won the Nobel Prize for Peace in 2007 for their work on climate change. If you read climate literature, you'll see the IPCC mentioned frequently. Some of their findings are summarized on this slide. So let me just state that climate science is very difficult to give definitive answers and to definitively prove causation. But as you'll note on this slide, the findings of the IPCC pretty clearly support the idea that climate change is happening, it is accelerating, and it is, and man-made or human effects are contributing to rapid climate warming. UN Sustainable Development Goals 12 through 15 are all about sustainability and the climate. SDG number 12 is about sustainable consumption and production. 13 is to combat climate change. 14 is about conserving the oceans and seas, and 15 is about promoting sustainable land use. In 2005, 192 countries got together and negotiated the Kyoto Protocol, which was the first major global effort to do something about climate change. The Kyoto Protocol divided the world into developed and developing countries, and then devised a system whereby the developed countries would basically pay the developing countries under a carbon trading scheme kind of similar to cap and trade that I just described in a previous slide. As you can see by this image, the United States signed but didn't ratify the agreement. Ratification means you actually take the thing home and put it into practice. So without the participation of the United States, the scheme basically fell apart. The Paris Accord has already come up in this lecture. You did a little lecture assignment on it, but let me just provide you with a few facts. 186 countries got together in 2015 and set a target of 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. That if we could hold warming to that level or below, we'd be okay. This has since generally been raised to 2 degrees Celsius. So if we can hold the warming to below that, we'd be all right. Developed countries were on the hook again to help developing countries meet their goals. Each country was supposed to pass its own laws and develop its own means of meeting its goals. The U.S., famously, after President Trump was elected, has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement, though we won't be formally out of it until November 2020 because it's not a quick process to get out of it. Climate change is an issue that is both local and global because pollution and the impacts of global warming are not limited by national boundaries. The Earth is, in effect, a shared resource. The tragedy of the commons refers to the idea of a shared resource that is controlled by no one, but used by everyone to everyone's benefit. All users of this resource want to maximize the use for their own good, and in the process, the shared resource can be overexploited, and then everybody loses. The tragedy of the commons refers to an old idea of shared commons in the town center of many traditional British and American towns. Everyone could graze their sheep or cattle on the shared resource. But if everyone put out more and more livestock because, hey, the grazing land is free, I might as well maximize my profits by putting out more and more cows. And pretty soon, if everybody does that, the commons becomes overgrazed, and then nobody's cows get fat because there's not enough grass on the commons. In the modern era, the high seas are probably the most commonly provided example of the tragedy of the commons. But my sister, who's a fairly famous scientist, argues that the Earth itself is the greatest example of the tragedy of the commons. If we all exploit resources to our own benefit, we end up benefiting no one. Your next activity is to answer true or false to this question and to provide a brief statement supporting your answer. Why did you choose what you chose? Now we turn our attention to businesses, and we'll take a look at their responsibility in the climate change issue. I was reading a study recently that identified 100 companies who are responsible for 70% of the greenhouse gases currently in the atmosphere. Not surprisingly, they are all either fossil fuel companies or mining companies. The list is led by China's state-owned coal company, and it's followed by the recently gone public Saudi Aramco. The U.S. energy giants also make the list. These extremely profitable companies are actually subsidized by the U.S. government through preferential tax treatments to the tune of about $4.5 billion per year. But we shouldn't cast these 100 companies as entirely evil. They do provide our electricity, fuel, and energy that funds our economic system. Or really, I should say that powers our economic system. So what can companies do? You may have heard of the triple bottom line before. I hope you have. It's a strategy that was developed some years ago to help companies stop focusing just on the bottom line of profits and more on the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. In other words, companies following this philosophy report to their shareholders their positive impact on the environment and on society, not just their return on equity. Triple bottom line was an effort to have companies bring more attention to their impacts that go beyond financial impacts. A lot of this is carried out through companies' corporate social responsibility mission. Another business solution I like a lot is the idea of the circular economy. The basic idea behind the circular economy is that products should be designed from the beginning to be continuously recycled, thereby keeping them out of landfills and reducing the amount of raw materials needed to produce new products. It involves changing our paradigm from owning things to maybe renting or using products for a fee and then giving them back to be repurposed. In order to make the circular economy work, we'd have to completely re-envision our supply chains. Instead of a straight line where we take raw materials, make them into something, sell that something, and then the consumer disposes of the something at the end of its life, the items instead go back to the producer in a continuous process of being recycled and remanufactured. I'm really interested in the circular economy, and in some of my courses, I teach a whole section on this, but we're going to keep this to a brief introduction. So take some time to watch this short video on the circular economy and then complete the question. Explain the idea of a circular economy and then choose one of the following products and discuss how it might be made more circular. We've been talking throughout this course about the way technology interacts with all of our topics, and this one is no different. We can use AI to better help in the fight against climate change. We heard about advanced analytics in fishery management in this week's reading, but AI can also help us manage or develop better electricity grids. It can help us better predict areas of high and low demands for power. Sensors on green buildings, maybe you've seen buildings that are LEED certified. Sensors on these buildings can make energy use more efficient too. We can use AI to better predict extreme weather events so we can better prepare for them and mitigate against them. We can also monitor deforestation using satellites. And there are visions where we could have AI help consumers reduce their personal carbon footprint by suggesting changes in behavior, maybe mass transportation alternatives or just choices you can make as you go throughout your day that can help reduce your environmental footprint, your carbon footprint. Okay, so we're on consumers. We're going to wrap up here. Speaking of consumers, nowadays we do have choices. Many of you might feel that what you do doesn't matter that much in the grand scheme of things, and these big issues of high emissions power generation and dominance of our economy by the fossil fuel companies are out of your hands. But I'd encourage you not to think that way. As consumers, you can vote. You can vote in the political system, and you can vote with your dollars by supporting companies who take action to protect the climate. You can make choices that support clean technology. My sister, for example, lives in New York City, and when they get their electric bill, they can pay at different levels. They can pay a lower amount for basically dirty energy, or they can pay a higher rate that supports the power company's clean technology. So you can choose to pay a little bit more. You can choose to pay a little bit more for local service or organic produce. You can also choose to consume less. Make small changes like shopping on eBay instead of Amazon. You're going to incur shipping either way, but at least eBay is recycling items and keeping them, prolonging their life instead of creating new ones from our dwindling resources. You can also eat less meat. Just pick 1 or 2 days a week when you eat no meat. If we all did that across the globe, it would help impact climate change. Okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox now and wish you all a great week. Thanks very much.